Tēnā koutou te whānau o Auckland Unitarians. Tēnā koutou nā manhere. No mai, haere mai ki tēnei whare karakia a te atua tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this space made sacred over the last 114 years by Auckland Unitarians. Seeking freedom of thought, a closer connection to each other in the world we live in, and a more loving way of being. We come each Sunday to remember that we can't do everything. There is a sense of liberation in that. It frees us to do something and do it very well. It may be incomplete, but it is a beginning, a step along the way. All are welcome here that come with an open mind and a loving heart and willing hands. Our opening words are by Carl Sagan. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined, is surely spiritual.
Right. So we've spent the better part of the last 8 years together in little boxes. 5 years ago, we lived in this little box. 2 years ago, we'd moved into this little box. And a combination of incremental shifts and major life changes has led us to our latest little box. These days, we call this little box our home. So I spent my childhood on a 44-foot sailboat with my mother and father and my sister. So when Steph and I were throwing around ideas for our post-uni OE, spending a year in a VW camper didn't seem too much of a stretch. We were only vaguely familiar with the idea of downsizing at the time, but we were well aware that we'd be extremely short on storage space in the van. So although it had not initially been our intention to experiment with tiny downsize living on our trip, we soon found that with only a small cupboard's worth of storage space each, 2 guitars, and a lot of secondhand books, we were having one of the best years of our lives.
So as we travelled around the US and Canada, meeting new and old friends, and working on permaculture-designed farms, homesteads, and suburban plots, we got to know people who were living differently. It was in this context that we were first explicitly introduced to the concept of voluntary simplicity. We met people living in community, sharing land, cooperating on a neighbourhood scale, in the city and in the suburbs, and also homesteading. These people were rediscovering and disseminating food traditions and filtering out the noise and chaos of our Western cultural landscape. We were drawn to their approach because it was a practical expression of our life values.
Upon selling our beloved van, we returned home in 2011 with ample inspiration to begin living simply ourselves. And we tried in earnest to apply some of the skills and philosophies our friends had modeled for us in North America. Although we had success in integrating a few good habits, like making a weekly batch of ricotta and learning to cook a delicious meal from scratch, we also soon found ourselves being sucked into a daily routine that didn't fit with the enlightened lifestyle we'd envisioned for ourselves. Our Canadian and American friends had made this simple lifestyle thing look seamless, yet our new routine was largely governed by the monstrous $410 weekly rental payments we were struggling to afford on our city apartment. The pressure of training in new skills, starting a business, and staying true to our morals while keeping up rent was immense and took its toll on us emotionally and psychologically.
When we first moved into our small apartment, the space seemed expansive and luxurious compared with what we'd adjusted to while van dwelling. We could stand up fully while cooking in the kitchen. We didn't need to pack away our bedroom in order to have a living room. And there was a loo and a shower inside our house. It seemed like we were rattling around in the space, but as time wore on, that space started to fill up. We got our belongings out of storage, and while we tried to separate the wheat from the chaff and be very conscious of what we brought home, it was as though all of this extra storage just filled itself automatically. Once it gained momentum, it was hard to stem the tide. It was as if our belongings were breeding out of control.
It became clear that city living wasn't working out for us. So after 3 years, we made a quick calculation, and we realized that what went down the rental sinkhole in 18 months could translate to a home owned outright, debt-free even. So in January of last year, we chose not to renew our lease. We moved out of the city, and having never constructed a thing in our lives, we began the build on our tiny house. So there are 6 photos. Okay, next one. Okay, next. So there's my
Oh,
dad.
I forgot to ask your permission for this one. We asked permission from everyone else.
Yeah, so that's what the inside of the house looked like before we'd put in walls. Next. That's what it looked like when the walls were in, but nothing else was done. That's the loft just after the bed slats were built. I've lost count. I think that's the last one.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, and that's the house moving up. Your
Yeah.
turn.
So this is our house today. Not quite finished, but completely livable.
Okay.
We have fewer possessions than most.
Hang on.
This is
our
our
house.
staircase, actually. We live in this staircase. It's a really efficient use of space.
Next. That's our kitchen.
Oh, we have more photos.
Yeah, there are 4 in total.
Oh, okay.
And there's the next
Sorry.
one. Our guitars on the wall. And that's the living room. That's actually the living room at night. Our house is actually quite light in the daytime.
So it's not quite finished, but it's completely livable. We're going to finish it in summer once it stops raining on our power tools, creating a real safety hazard. We have fewer possessions than most, and we're living off the grid. We're trying to re-establish a lifestyle that's in line with our ethics and living out the values in a voluntary simplicity lifestyle.
A couple of weeks ago, Clay gave us a rundown of the age of neoliberalism in which we find ourselves. Neoliberalism reduces all values to money values. The worth of a thing is the price of the thing. The worth of a person is the wealth of the person, he told us. Thank you, Clay. But as author Simon Powell states, large groups of people, particularly the youth and the dispossessed, are challenging the status quo and looking for alternative cultural modes of being. Voluntary simplicity is one such alternative.
Okay.
It's a very young state.
I'm time traveling. According to the Simplicity Collective, voluntary simplicity involves providing for material needs as simply and directly as possible, minimizing expenditure on consumer goods and services, and directing progressively more time and energy towards pursuing non-materialistic sources of satisfaction and meaning. This generally means accepting a slightly lower income and a lower level of consumption in exchange for more time and freedom to pursue other life goals, such as community or social engagements, more time with family, artistic or intellectual projects, more fulfilling employment, political participation, sustainable living, spiritual exploration, reading, contemplation, relaxing, pleasure-seeking, love, and so on. None of which needs to rely on money or much money. It should be noted, though, that voluntary simplicity does not, however, mean living in poverty, becoming an ascetic monk, or indiscriminately renouncing all the advantages of science and technology. It does not involve regressing to a primitive state or becoming a self-righteous Puritan. And it's not some escapist fad reserved for saints, hippies, or eccentric outsiders.
Although I do identify as a hippie.
And I do identify as an eccentric outsider. Rather, advocates of simplicity suggest that the simple life of voluntary simplicity is about discovering the freedom and contentment that comes with knowing how much consumption is truly enough. In short, voluntary simplicity seeks to find alternatives for the ecological, economic, and emotional turbulence of our current Western paradigm.
So, where does voluntary simplicity play a part in our lives? It inspired us to learn how to build, for a start. It has also motivated us to ditch our television, mend our own clothes, begin a garden, and keep backyard chickens. This week we're getting a worm farm in order to reduce our waste by way of composting. Living simply allows us to lead our lives more closely according to our ethical framework, indirectly and directly reducing our impact on the planet.
For example, it is an active rejection of consumer culture. By the virtue of the size of our tiny home, we have a real physical limitation on what stuff we can bring home with us. As a result, less stuff is making its way to the landfill. We got rid of our TV just before we went travelling in the van, and we never bothered to replace it, mostly because I'm alarmed at all the channels. It's very confusing, digital, I don't know, I'm beyond it. It's just like Twitter, I don't know. But we find that instead of watching TV, we fill the time with reading, music, socialising, reflection, playing games. We still watch movies, of course, and the odd TV show when we hear of a good one that's come along, but we're no longer exposed to the commercials, which we noticed that removing this major source of direct advertising allowed its effects to sort of wear off. Soon we weren't craving certain products or keeping up with what was new. And an odd effect of it was that billboards and bus ads, print versions of campaigns linked to TV ads, just made no sense to us. So we just stopped even noticing them.
For us, choosing a simpler lifestyle is a direct response to the specific social and economic climate in which we're coming of age.
Yeah, for instance, Auckland's housing crisis.
What housing crisis?
Yeah. In my first year of uni, Auckland's average house price was $400K. So over the past decade, I've watched property prices slip far out of my reach to over 800K. And for us, our tiny house represents the security of having our own space, affordably. We now pay a small fraction of what we paid in the city for our current ground rent. Our house also unlocks the ability to save and acts as an obvious physical reminder for us to live out our values. Besides, buying an 800K starter home is just not economically viable for us right now, maybe ever.
Finally, it's empowering to possess the skills to build a house, grow our own food, collect our own rainwater, mend our own clothes, and make our own music. It is crucial, however, that we acknowledge the place of privilege from which we have chosen to lead our life of simplicity. We had to have been born into wealthy nations with illogical consumer habits in order to make the choice to reject them. Even within those wealthy nations, obscene numbers of people have dispossession thrust upon them. And further, we're enormously privileged to have been able to take off time from work to build our home and to have had locations to build and situate it. It's also worth noting that voluntary simplicity is not without its challenges.
Yes, downsizing can take time, it's daunting, it can be tedious and confronting, and it's an ongoing process. However, not only have we not missed a thing that we've gotten rid of, we actually can scarcely remember what those things were. With some trial and error, we've discovered that it's better to approach downsizing in small bursts and to be methodical. We used to have this diabolical drawer in our apartment kitchen. I don't know if you've got one. Ours was filled with self-multiplying utensils. So one day we emptied the drawer, we put them all away in a box. And as we needed a mixing spoon or a veg peeler or a whisk, we returned it to the drawer. After a few weeks, those were the only tools we really used, so we just donated the rest. This long-term approach was much more successful strategy than the shoving things hastily in boxes method we employed as we neared our move-out day. We store our off-season clothes under our couch that you saw a picture of before, and at the end of each season, when we swap our clothes over into our drawers, we just go through it and get rid of things we didn't wear. Another challenge is time. We still don't have heaps of spare time. With the standard working week plus commute, that's the unfortunate norm in our modern culture. But now we're not as stressed about making ends meet, and we spend our free time more productively and thoughtfully.
I realized at some point earlier this year that as my business has expanded, I've not had as much time to write music as I used to. But because the pressure of our weekly rental payments has all but been removed, I found that I was able to take off Friday afternoons for songwriting.
So the changes that we make are incremental and inconsistent, and forming good habits takes self-discipline and self-forgiveness and a good sense of humour. As we learned in the flat, our North American friends didn't arrive at any idyllic lifestyle by snapping their fingers, and indeed, this oft-glorified lifestyle can be totally without glory. Good intentions don't always line up with practical application, and sometimes we just want to watch bad movies and eat lots of pizza. So
we can't be fundamentalists, and there are some things that we won't be sacrificing. For example, we have a huge book and vinyl collection currently stored in the basement of my very tolerant parents. There's no sense in getting rid of everything that brings you joy, and our ideal future situation would include a separated office with a bookshelf or two. The part that has not been a challenge in the least is living in a house considered tiny by today's standards. Since we moved in November, we have yet to even notice how small our house is, strange as that may sound.
Yeah, being thoughtful about how much space and resources our lifestyle takes up is not just a coping mechanism for me in today's society, but it also figures into our vision of the world to come. In this imagined future, Auckland is still populated by little boxes, but these little boxes are surrounded by chickens, unruly veggie patches, and parcels of native bush for the local fauna. There's co-housing, there's local waste recycling, there's decentralised power generation. These little boxes form part of a walkable and cyclable village hub that are all connected together by public transport. Picture strong communities, equitably sharing resources in step with the needs and limits of Earth and the web of life that she hosts.
We'd like to finish up with a song. We promise it's not Kumbaya. This particular song is one that we've both loved for a while, but which has taken on a new meaning in light of our current living circumstances. Please sing along if you feel so inclined. We're going to sing Our House by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young.
For our closing words. Simplify, 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 said Emerson. Thoreau replied, one simplify would do, Ralph. May the efforts we have made here today to listen with caring and compassion sustain us in the days ahead. May these efforts bring peace into our lives.